And we're starting recording now.
There's always this very weird silence. This.
Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's event of the NECE Campus 2020 called Civic Deserts in Europe Explained. My name is Yannick Peterson from the NECE coordination team at Lab Concepts, the event concept agency supporting the Federal Agency for Civic Education and its 7 European partners of NECE in the creation and conduction of the NECE Campus. We are very thrilled for today's event. We are very thrilled to be live on Facebook, and we are extremely thrilled to, for the first time, having a graphic recorder with us today, Gabriele Schlipf, who you do not see or partially see with her hand, will graphically accompany this meeting, this workshop, and also have the results, kind of the graphic results available on the HouseSpace platform of this event, which you hopefully have all accessed by now, because it's an integral part both of this event and of the campus as well. Remember that it remains active for the total duration of the campus. So please check it out again, check out other events as well, and keep the discussion and networking alive on the space. Please find the link to the platform once again here in the Zoom chat. That is all from my side. I'm wishing you a very, very good event today, and I would like to hand over for a topical introduction to Christoph Müller-Hofstede from the Federal Agency of Civic Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick. Thank you, Gabriele, for showing us already a bit of your work. And of course, good afternoon and a very warm welcome from my side to this lunch with ideas starting in a few minutes on our NECE campus, which has become quite of a familiar territory to me at least, and I hope it will become something like this to you as well. So I'm looking forward really, as Yannick said, to a very inspiring and I think also very timely talk on a new term, civic deserts, and an old problem, the marginalization of territories in Europe and elsewhere, of course, when it comes to civic competencies, civic life, civic engagement, and civic possibilities and capacities, actually. And so I'm very glad that Louisa Sofia platform with its new project, Civic Europe, took up that problem and will confront it and present it to us. And I think it's one of the basic ideas really of the campus to look forward to tackling problems and addressing problems of civic education as well, because we have to admit civic education, not only in Germany, but also in Europe, has definitely an urban bias, so to say, and maybe when it comes to Europe, it has also still a West European bias. So just one sentence to my person. I'm Christoph Müller-Hofstede. Many of you may have already met me on other occasions. I'm with the Federal Agency for Civic Education, and I'm the NECE coordinator, together with a group of colleagues from Poland and from the Netherlands. Just one or few ideas about the NECE Campus. The NECE Campus, as you might know by now, is a series of more than 30 events already started at the end of August, organized by NECE, the networking European Citizenship Education platform of the Federal Agency for Civic Education, but of course with our partners and other networks as well. Just a few remarks about the purpose of that NECE Campus series. What do we want to achieve here? The campus will be, and that's really important to keep in mind, preparing an agenda and of course a community, if you want, if you like, for the annual NECE conference in Berlin in November, early November, 5 to 7, just 48 hours after the presidential elections in the US, just to mention that event as well. And due to the pandemic, it will be organized in a hybrid way. So we will have an offline crowd, so to say, gathering in Berlin. Up to 240 people are allowed there. Seats are limited, but of course we will have a big online platform, lots of digital channels, and of course you are all invited to register and to take part in that conference. The conference itself, it will be an interesting and politically charged event. As you know, Berlin is the capital of Germany. Germany has just taken over the EU presidency from July to December 2020, and we really want to use that political background, so to say, and the possibility to contact the political class, so to say, not only in Berlin, but also in Europe, to really to highlight the essential role of citizenship education for the recovery of Europe. Why do we do that? Why do we think citizenship education should be a focus and indeed a priority for European citizen and for the European decision makers really to restart Europe as they wanted to do? European societies, as you all know, and I mean really on a global level as well, are going through enormous changes and challenges, caused, among other things, but foremost, I'm tempted to say, by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still raging on, one has to say, as we speak. They rely, and our societies for more than ever rely on the competencies and on the commitment of the citizens to understand, adapt, and to learn in such a situation. For example, to distinguish reliable from unreliable information and conspiracy theories, to deal with uncertainty and an unknowable future, to participate politically in the decisions that we need to make in such a crisis. In short, we are convinced that we are facing a watershed moment for citizenship education in Europe, and we want to really build a momentum with that campus and in the conference in Berlin to bring that point closer to the political class and to decision makers in Europe. So on that note, I conclude my short introduction, and I think it's no better moment here to advocate for citizenship education on all levels, and it's no better moment really to discuss the very problems you want to address, Louisa and Dobrena and the Sophia platform on civic deserts in Europe. I'm looking forward to a very inspiring and great talk. Thanks so much for engaging with us on the campus.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us and for the opportunity. I was actually imagining this as a real brown bag lunch, so that in case you don't like what I am going to be talking about, at least it's not a waste of time, but you've had your lunch as part of that. So if you've got something to nibble, a salad or a sandwich, please feel free. I'm not going to feel offended in any ways. I will share a presentation because I think when you do these things online, it's always a little bit challenging to interact and to engage. Hence, have prepared really very few slides. that are going to walk us through this conversation. And we've also built a couple of possibilities for us to have a short discussion. So after each sort of presentation block, there is a short section on the house space where there are questions for discussion. So feel free to post whatever thoughts you might have there. And if I tend to speak too fast, please let me know, because I do that every now and then. I'm going to be trying to pace myself. Obviously, as my colleague said, today's conversation is on civic deserts. Obviously, trying to explain civic deserts is a little bit far-fetched, because we won't be able to explain a reality in an area like that. But at least what we're going to try to do is talk a bit about what a civic desert is, how it looks like, how you basically learn more about it, and where possible interventions that one can think of doing in areas like that in Europe. So as a apologies. So no live streamed event is right if nothing goes wrong with the PowerPoint. So I'm trying to move the slides. I'm just looking at my colleagues. If someone can help me do that, that would be great.
There is an arrow.
Yeah. It did work over here. So these are mainly the questions that we're going to be looking at. As I said, what is a civic desert? How we did a needs assessment and mapping in 4 countries in Europe to identify what these places are. And then how did we move from focusing on the assets there, and what are the interventions that we propose to do? Civic desert sounds like a sexy term. We keep putting it, in quote unquote, because we don't like it that much, because it's pretty negative. It tells you there is an area where there is nothing. Actually, as it will turn out later in our conversation, that's not the case. But usually a civic desert, as a term describes, places where there are little to no opportunities for civic engagement. You won't be surprised to learn that the term was coined in 2016 following the elections in the US. Colleagues at Tufts in Boston, at a center that is called Circle like a round, came up with a term because they were looking at voter behavior at the presidential elections in 2016. And they noticed the trend that we also see in some countries in Europe, where basically the larger urban centers tend to be more liberal, more progressive, I would even say. And then the smaller towns and villages and communities tend to vote more conservative. When you look at the electoral maps, even at the local elections, let's say in countries like Poland and Hungary, in the recent years, this is a tendency and a trend that you're going to notice. Now, similar to our colleagues in the US, we too got interested in why are dynamics so different outside of urban centers. Also motivated partially due to by electoral results in the so-called troublemakers of Central and Eastern Europe, and we found out similar tendencies. Now, the way that our colleagues in the US define these places are basically to say there are 2 main components. On the one hand, people do not necessarily perceive themselves as active parts of society. So they don't think and feel that anything that they would do would make any change, but also they don't see the urge of engaging in any ways. At the same time, they also quite often lack the so-called civic competences. These competences are a term that people like us within civic education work with quite often. When we speak of civic competences, we mean a combination of 3 things. That's the knowledge, often of institutions, that's the skills so that you actually practically engage, and that is the dispositions and the attitudes. So those things that out of your beliefs make you be an active citizen. So this one component is often lacking in these so-called civic deserts, the civic literacy component. And the second component is the so-called civic infrastructure, which is defined mainly in 2 ways. On the one hand, there is a sheer lack of spaces. So physical spaces where people would come to, would be able to interact with each other, would be able to live the community life. So they're not there, or they're really scarce. And then the second component is that even if there are civic actors there, they're quite often so much involved in their daily work that they lack capacities to do more. Or quite often, those civic actors are engaged in social service type of work. So they don't have the capacities actually to follow a more mission-driven type of work. And apart from these components, obviously, when you start digging a little bit deeper, you discover different things. Now, I'm looking at Europe and at the countries we were examining over the past more than half a year. That's Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. You notice things like these so-called civic deserts are usually border regions or peripheral regions. They also quite often run along the former imperial borders. I think this is not going to come to surprise to some of you. So when you look at the map of, I'd say, Romania or Poland, for example, that's pretty much, in Bulgaria as well, this is pretty much the case. So history obviously matters a lot to our countries still. Usually these are also places that have struggled economically, so there is little investment. You don't get a sense of institutions there. So you'd feel like, let's say, the police is not there anymore. There is no hospital. Schools are not functioning because there are simply no young people. So depopulation is a big topic in areas like that. Often because of the lack of mobility in our countries, there's also depopulation is partially caused by these so-called magnet cities. So in areas like that, there is one city that is attracting everyone, but because of lack of mobility and also bad physical infrastructure, sometimes people tend to reallocate to those other cities, magnet cities, and don't commute back and forth, let's say. So this is, so to speak, in a nutshell, this new term, civic desert, that we also decided to work with while examining the civic deserts of Central and Eastern Europe. I want to pause here, looking back at you to see if you have any immediate questions or comments, taking myself breath, looking around to see if there are any immediate reactions to that. And if not, we thought of basically
Sorry, Louisa, sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, just one question. You might mention that, but I can't hear before that. What about the data resources? So you did a research, but how the information came from?
Yeah, I am going to get to that because this is basically our and my next slide. But yeah,
I can wait.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's great. Someone asked, posted in the chat, how about islands? That's a great question, and I think this is also, and I'm not sure where the question comes from, but I could think that this comes from a participant from Greece. I'm looking around the room. Probably that's correct. I think that's a similar situation in islands. It's about it's Greece. It is a similar situation in islands because from what I know, but this is not an extensive research. It's really basically looking into actually applications coming into this program from island areas in Greece, is that quite often population there feels like decisions about politics and life in the islands are taken somewhere else, so not amongst the people and the citizens and the population of that island. So definitely. But this is also a good transition to our first set of questions. Can you maybe yourself, based on this very short description, think of such regions, not necessarily in the countries that I just mentioned and I'm going to talk about, but maybe other countries that you are familiar with. And then the colleagues from NECE have prepared a workspace on on the virtual platform. When you look at the chat, there is a link to that. So if you want to take a moment to maybe think about that and post a couple of names there, I think we can have a good discussion about that too. So I'll pause here for, let's say, minute 2, 3, and then we'll go back to actually how we did the research on these so-called civic deserts in the 4 countries that I give as an example. I'll just open the house page so you see how it looks like. Again, you see that, right?
Yes.
So over here, there is we've called it discussion 1. You can post an idea about an area. As the colleague from Greece was saying, there is a beautiful island I can think of, and just leave it here. That's an interesting comment from Hungary. I'm happy to react to that one as well, and maybe get into a more elaborate discussion. All right, I will continue then, going back to the presentation. Right, we also have some comments in the chat here. We're going to move them to the new space for consistency. Now, Kitty, who is also a colleague of ours, we have been interviewing in this mapping and research phase, did rightfully ask the question, how did we come up with that? So not a rocket science. We basically used 2 approaches. The one is obviously desk research. So you read about the variety of data available on regions and cities in the countries. These are informations often gathered by organizations like the World Bank, which works a lot on the intersection between society and economics and urban development. On the other hand, of course, the European Union has various publications. And as a third resource, anything that is available on quality of democracy in the countries plus a state of civil society. Now, of course, as you might know yourselves, information like that is available, research like that is available, again, on a national level. So there are nationally representative studies, and hardly you find anything that is a more detailed picture on the local level, especially in English. So what we did is basically snowball principle interviews. We started from our network interviewing colleagues that are based in the capital quite often. And from there on, tapping into their networks, we basically ask them to do two things. The one is to tell us, based on their assumption and based on that definition, what they think is a civic desert what is a civic desert in their country, or which areas might be considered as civic deserts. You will not be surprised that in the smaller countries, colleagues would say, well, anything outside of the capital, for example. And I think this is also not a surprise because when you look at the level of centralization in countries like Hungary and Bulgaria, for example, that's quite appalling. So let's say the capitals are 1.5 million to 2, and the next large city is 300,000. In Hungary, I think Debrecen is around 200,000. Bulgaria, the second largest, is 350. So this large centralization, I think, is already a precondition for large centralization also of civic life, of civic possibilities, but also of philanthropy. So quite often, donor organizations, philanthropy focuses on organizations that are based in the bigger cities and less so outside of them. So we worked with this approach on identifying the areas, but also in identifying stakeholders that we could talk to on the very community level. And based on the second round of conversation with obviously community leaders and community-based organizations, we decided to focus there on three components. On the one hand, to look into what are actually the needs of organizations in these so-called civic deserts, if they exist, and what are actually the civic actors there? Who are they? Are these necessarily registered non-governmental organizations, or are these sometimes civic leaders that are based within a school, that might be a teacher, or are these sometimes community centers or libraries or something else? The second area of questions that we focused is anything related to the ecosystem. So what else, apart from strengthening your own capacities and your organizational capacities to do civic work, what else would you need as a civic actor on the local level to basically advance your work? And the third set of questions related to the existing relationships and the networks, because what we I think in the initial phase of this mapping discovered is that quite often when you look at the meta level, you'd see a map that is full of stakeholders and is not so deserted, but then quite often the relationships among them have not been established yet. So we're in that second stage right now, where we're trying to actually create also visual maps of those three components, so that they become first and foremost visible to the outside world, to say these areas are really not so deserted, but also to try to attract the attention to the type of needs that organizations have, because often on the very local level, they're different from the ones of the organizations in the bigger urban centers, but also to the other sort of impediments to their work that are related to the ecosystem. I'm not sure if this answered Kitty's question or other questions, but I'm gonna move to a second sort of set of questions for discussion among us. Whether you've got other ideas about how to find out more about the context in such areas, apart from obviously traveling there, which is currently a little bit difficult, and whether you can think of colleagues of yours who are doing civic work in such regions and what their sort of needs and struggles are. And I would invite you again to go to the discussion block, which is on the house space, also because I think keeping record of your thoughts there is helping us in doing the most of our current phase of mapping and research. I just asked Yannick if you could post in the chat again the link to the house space so that it's a little bit easier for everyone to find it. And again, we'll take a couple of minutes for that. I'm just going to read out loud some of your comments, and maybe I can ask you to say a couple of words on that if you feel like, because this can be also conversation, obviously. I'm just going to read out loud. Kitty has been quoting an organization, Ecological CD Process, which is a local association focusing on micro-regional development as an example. And move, we do ecotabs in Hungary. Main experiences that it is difficult to get civic groups in these deserted areas. We call them white spots, which is also another term to talk about these areas. More out of their comfort zone to try and advocate and network. They learn to adapt to and navigate in the current political environment. I think politics is another aspect of life in these areas that we didn't talk about much, but I did mention this in the beginning that it's either regions with a low turnout or it's also regions that clearly align with whoever we consider to be the more illiberal / authoritarian leadership at that time. We have a comment on Germany. There are a lot of projects right now in Germany engaging with these regions. Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why there is such work in Germany is that there is not only the awareness that there is more work to encourage exactly that type of civic participation that someone else talked about further down, but also because there are more resources for this type of work in Germany. An idea on the mapping also include access to cultural opportunities beyond economic infrastructure and formal characteristics. Civic deserts may have few cultural spaces or places of engagement where initiatives can emerge. Absolutely, we're considering them. So in the sort of the original definition of civic deserts, the five areas of engagement of a place are religious and faith-based organizations, the easy physical access to schools and universities. The third is easy physical access to early childhood programs. So that's participation on the children, or the level of young people and children. Then community organizations, and then arts, entertainment, and cultural activities, obviously. On the one question that came on how you actually motivate and whether there are strategies to engage people, I'm going to talk about in the third and last part of the presentation, because this is where I'm going to talk about what Civic Europe as a program has been currently doing. And I'll switch back to the presentation. Now, obviously, one of the discoveries was, of course, that the areas are not so deserted, which is great, and I think is also part of the mission of Civic Europe. So, Civic Europe is a two strand program. On the one hand, what it does is an open call for ideas that are specifically rooted in the local level outside of big cities in parts of Europe. The logic is that it's the part of Europe that needs a little bit more support currently, without needing to, to label Europe in different names. But that's Southern and Eastern Europe. So the call is open for organizations and ideas and individuals who have an idea of how to support civic engagement through civic education on the local level in 12 EU countries to the south and to the east of Europe. Now, next to that, there is a capacity building program for which we actually did this detailed mapping in the 4 countries. And what the capacity building program does is that it identifies one such region, a local partner with whom together to develop a program that strengthens the capacities of civic actors that are located in that region and who do work with civic education and civic engagement. The program runs differently in the different countries. So in Hungary, Poland, and Romania, focuses on one region. In Hungary, it works in the area of Debrecen and Miskolc. In Romania, it works in the south. And in Poland, it works to the east of the country. And there, the purpose of the program is to, within the remaining 1 year, to strengthen the capacities of some 15 to 20 organizations that really do a granular local level civic education and civic engagement work. In Bulgaria, the program runs a little bit differently, simply because we have recognized throughout the mapping phase that it made much more sense to focus on individuals who might afterwards decide to found an organization, but might also decide not to and to remain active, let's say in the school or in the community center where they already are. On top of that, I mentioned earlier, we're developing this virtual map where we actually want to bring visibility to those who are active on the local level and are not the usual suspects to go to in the capitals of the countries. And we wanted to make sure that they also start appearing on our shared map of civic actors in Europe. We're also piloting Civic Health Index for the first time in Bulgaria, and it's a pilot, so we're not talking too much about it yet because we also don't know what's gonna come out of it. But it has some 15 indicators that look into different components and factors of engagement, both institutional but also community. It also looks at questions of e-governance now that that's even becoming more topical in COVID times. And it also looks at additional target groups like children, people with disabilities, minorities participation. And it also looks into how COVID-19 has been impacting the civic health of citizens over the past month. It is also an interesting time to pilot this index in Bulgaria now that probably you've been following the news and know that for more than 2 months there are civic protests in the country. So it's interesting to see how that's reflected in the index, and we'll be happy to share more on that as we go. And then last but not least, we actually see part of the work on and within Civic Europe to flow into a paper where we spell out a couple of recommendations, and we want to especially target it to policymakers and to philanthropy, because we think that also lessons learned from a variety of so-called pooled funds over the past 10 to 20 years in the regions show that the lack of engagement in areas outside of big cities at some point has an impact on on our political and civic life. And the more we disengage, the more that becomes a shared problem for everyone. So to answer one of the questions, how we actually motivate people to engage in the different countries, we're relying on the local partners who then strengthen their communities of organizations who then work with people on the ground. So it's a multi-layered activity. The organizational capacities that we try to strengthen in the capacity building programs are really tailored to the needs of the organizations in the different countries. So that's a very granular work, but we think that this is the way to go if you really want to make sure that you were helping out the way you could and should. And then I'd like to open up for a last round of feedback on your side. Apart from, capacity building programs for locally rooted organizations, and apart from trying to support them and these regions with a little bit more visibility, what other ideas would come to your mind out of your experiences in working in the field that one could do in terms of activities in so-called civic deserts, including if you have an idea for a better name of areas like that doesn't sound non-appreciated, not appreciative. That is also highly welcome. And I'm going to ask again Yannick to post the link to the house space in the chat here. So if anything comes to your mind when it comes to what else can be done in areas like that. This is a great idea on to have better data. Absolutely. I think we would all love to have it. And part of the reason why we're doing the Civic Health Index in Bulgaria is exactly to get a better grasp of data. And partially with these visual maps that we're going to do in 3 areas, we hope that with that we'll be able to gather more and better data. Of course, the question is with how representative that will be, but we have to see as we move. VDEM, I think when I'm looking in the room, there are a couple of you that I know in the room who are also great fans of the VDEM data, us included. Yeah, absolutely. Here's a comment on how to improve the real infrastructure on the local level, including Wi-Fi. I think this is something all of us who work on the local level saw now, and those of us who work with schools really notice that there is, apart from improving the civic infrastructure in that sense, also looking into real infrastructural programs and projects and problems like lack of Wi-Fi is absolutely a thing. Some of you highlight here that it's important to engage with the cultural scene, highlighting the local success stories. Absolutely, there is a recent. All of you know this out of your experience, but the smaller you are as an organization, the more you're locally rooted, the less resources you actually have to communicate your success stories. And I think part of the analysis of the past years has been that also civil society became a target of so much criticism because it never had the resources to actually communicate what it's doing. There is one more comment here. Absolutely. Again, on the livelihoods and the storytelling and the importance of that, would be useful to coordinate more with other similar initiatives, coupled with the focus on the rural areas in Central European countries. Um, it's fashionable right now to go outside of. It's great if it's becoming fashionable, and yeah, I totally agree with you. I think as part of the mapping, we're at least starting to get in touch with more and more organizations that work uh, in a similar way, trying to create also networks and work with local partners rather than try to do the work themselves, which is anyways would be far-fetched because the partners with whom we're doing this program from the organization Meet Us and our organization Bulgaria Sofia platform, we're sitting elsewhere, and it's the work of the partners, not obviously ours. I am looking at the time. I think we're left with less than 10 minutes. And I just wanted to encourage you to yeah, to see if there is anything left that you wanna share with us. Maybe ask, but maybe really open it more to a conversation rather than uh, yeah, you nibbling your lunch and typing and me talking all the time. So there's anything else that comes to mind that you wanna share as a comment or maybe as a question, please feel free.
Remember to unmute your microphone if you would like to ask a question here. And otherwise, as you see there, you also have the chance to ask written questions in the My Comments and Questions section. I see that one already came up, actually.
There is a comment on the term civic deserts here. Someone says that it's very helpful and clearly identifies a problem, even to someone who's not familiar with the field. Thank you for the feedback.
Maybe I can
Please
just follow up on that. I mean, because I had a little bit of a critical comment to the term civic desert, because we have that eternal debate, you know, how to name marginalized areas, marginalized people, you know, how to reach people in civic education. Of course, civic desert is clearly a quite blunt and graphic description what might be or might not be true of a certain region, and but of course it's clearly you know, pointing out to a big deficit, and then of course, as you know, from the big debate on anywheres and somewheres, it can be a little bit of a dangerous thing in the political communication of civic education, actually. And I've heard from you, Louisa, that you would be actually looking for a new or better term, or is that true, or would you rather stick to it? Or were there any big fundamental debates on that term? I think it's as a working and graphic term to start the discussion and really attract people to the problem. It's great. So I'm ambivalent really about that term.
2 points to that. I think in the process of mapping, we've been also more and more talking to colleagues, and some of them are actually now here in the session, who have been saying that it makes much more sense to focus on the assets rather than on the needs and the deficiencies of these areas. And I think part of us doing a map of the region of the regions, where we want to put a pin on each stakeholder, is exactly for that, to actually show that civic deserts are not so deserted after all. So there are opportunities, but they might not be those who come to your mind as the first place to go to, or the first person to go to. And then secondly, we use the term, and I think we're going to keep using the term, but we're putting you know, quote unquote, so that people actually know that we're using this with a grain of salt. So someone says, presumably the term is borrowed from the food deserts. Michelle Obama used to talk about them. Is it desert or desserts? As we started the program, there was a running joke in the team because someone was saying it's the civic desserts, it's not the deserts. So maybe we come up with a with a civic dessert at the end. Someone is saying CDA, civic development areas, perhaps a slightly less blunt term and more focused on growth and building opportunities. That sounds like a good idea. CDA is a little bit like the SDGs, so it's sounds as you were saying. So focused on growth sounds a little bit more technical. Is also a nice term. Right. I am looking around to see who else has left and if there is are any more comments or questions. We've prepared just one final slide, not because there is a lot of information on it or much more left to share, but we thought just making sure that you know how to get in touch with us if you wanted to. And I'm just going back to the presentation because it's a little bit easier to put on the slide. Obviously, the program has a name and it's Civic Europe, as I mentioned earlier. This is our website, civic-europe.eu. You can also look up, of course, as everyone else, what we're doing on Facebook, but also first and foremost, maybe register to get the newsletter. We're not planning to send it out too often, but what we're going to do there is to tell the stories of all those organizations that we're going to work with, because it might have not become very clear from the presentation. But in Bulgaria, we're working with something like more than 40 individuals, and each of them is doing a small civic project on a local level. It's similar in the other three countries, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, where each of the organizations is going to have their project, which are going to be, I think, stories of what communities struggle with, stories of community life, but also stories of success. So if you'd like to follow up on that and keep up to date, you're more than welcome to do this either by checking the stories on the website or registering to get the newsletter, which is not going to come too often, but then hopefully it will be really spot on and high quality. If you have other suggestions or want to really learn a little bit more and more granular about our plans and also about the paper we plan to publish, please feel free to get in touch with the teams. All the contacts are on the website of Civic Europe. Each of us does different part of the program because it's a pretty big and pretty pretty ambitious. So I'm leaving this out here. I think the house space is open for your comments and suggestions and ideas for the time being. We would be happy to hear from you and stay in touch with you.
Mind if I pick up on that, Louisa?
Please.
Yeah, I was actually just wanted to say there's a lot of talk about positive examples and success stories, obviously. And I think Yannick's going to support me on this, that sharing those positive examples is often a problem of visibility again. And as much as would love to share our experience on this, we'd really like to see what's happening on our side as well. So if I'm not wrong, that house space is going to be open until the end of the conference as well. So I think keeping on building of other formulations of the term itself, so it's more generative, hearing more about similar places and success stories around them and building sort of a network of sharing around that. Having that on house space would also be a very good a way to continue on that. So we're going to be keeping track of house space until it's available as well, having that sort of mutual relationship on both ends.
Thank you. All right. So Yannick is, I think, posting the link to the house space again. It's a fun space to engage. I think, even though we've got an overload, all of us, of different platforms and communication channels, but I think this is a nice one, and it keeps a good track. Thank you very much for your appreciation in the chat. We're also very grateful for you taking the time. Again, I hope you were able to combine it with your lunch, and then yeah, looking forward to staying in touch and maybe expanding the conversation to other places with more data. And yeah, just let's stay in touch. I think especially in these times, you know, getting to hear from here and there, and also having the chance to interact and share with others is becoming, at least to me here in our garden, in our office in Sofia, very, very important.
Thank you, Louisa. I would like to hand back to Christoph Müller-Hofstede for the closing remarks.
Yeah, so actually, I do not want to make any closing remarks, but rather show us maybe at least a quick glance on the work of Gabriele Schlipf, who is actually graphically recording our session, or has been graphically recording our session. Maybe it would be great at least to have that quick glance on your work, Gabriele, if you want to share that with us. I mean, that's the opening idea. And I guess you added a lot of work to that. So
hi, hello. After
hello.
Listening to you.
Yeah.
I'm just talking a little bit now. So this is kind of the headline, what it is all about. And then I started with the opening remarks, and I'm now going to add the most important things, which what I heard is share the positive stories, be visible, and let's stay in touch, all of you. And then I try to capture the presentation, which I will add in some more. There was so much information that I got a bit of a lack of pictures. I will add more pictures there.
Lovely.
So, and I was looking for the discussions as well. That's number one. And then I have to get through all my papers. Number two. Of course, you can have a look at the desert from underneath it or above. And that's all the answers in the discussion 3. So you have really a lot of ideas what we can still do. And also I captured mapping and needs, and I added the visibility to it as a third topic. And this is the assets from the one project. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thanks so much, Gabriele. Really, it's great to have you and to get that mirror really of our work in such a way. And of course, will be put on our website, and so everybody can work with your work, so to say, in the future as well. So from my side, really a big thanks to Louisa, to Dobrena, to all of you for taking out time and energy and ideas really for this lunch with ideas. I think lots of ideas have been in the room and will be there in the room. Dobrena, really, you mentioned the right thing, that house space really can be the territory, so to say, where everybody can engage after this event. And before I conclude this session, let me really point out one more important event in more than one way, I would argue, related to this talk from Louisa. It's a workshop with Anna Lührmann, the Vice President of the VDEM, the Varieties of Democracy Institute. You can see it here on the screen. On a new resource guide for defending democracy against illiberal challenges, More information on that you will find on our house-based site, of course. And of course, it's a big invite to all of you to really join the session. With Anna Lührmann, as I said, with Carolina Vigura, a member of the NECE advisory board from Warsaw, Poland, commenting on the situation in Poland, and with Jeremy Garnier, from Berlin, leading the head office manager of the Berlin office of More in Common, a great supranational, transnational initiative on really tackling polarization and I guess civic deserts in various countries. So I think he will bring a lot of information too. And of course, you are invited to take part in that session in an interactive way using house baits, and the graphic recording will be there. So it would be great if you could be with us tomorrow afternoon, actually, from 4 to 5:30 CET. Thanks again, and have a wonderful lunch. If you haven't had one, I guess I will have one in a few minutes from now. Okay, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
was
Bye-bye.
lovely. Yeah, thanks so
See you
much.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.